Welcome back to another episode of Know Your Legacy. I'm your host, V, and today's guest is Andrew Horn. Andrew is a social entrepreneur, author, and speaker. He's built a number of thriving businesses that have helped humanity in a number of ways, and Forbes calls him the Dale Carnegie of the digital age. He is working on a number of exciting projects, and I'm excited to have him here, man. Andrew, thanks for being here, bro.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here, V.
Most definitely. So we're talking about a number of stuff off air, and I thought it's just best if I just hit record, man, and we just capture everything so people know in what we're talking about. But I guess just before we jump into the deeper stuff, I think you're in New York, right, at the moment?
I'm in Brooklyn. Yep.
Brooklyn, cool. Yeah, but if I understand correctly, you didn't grow up there.
No, I did not. I grew up in Maui, Hawaii. So I was born in the same hospital as President Barack Obama on Oahu, and then spent most of my formative years on the south side of Maui.
Oh, nice. What was it like out there? Because I haven't been to New York or Hawaii. I haven't had the benefit of going to either of those places, but I can imagine it's very different to New York.
Well, it's paradise, and it's also got its tougher elements. I mean, I grew up, 5-minute walk from the beach, and I was there literally every single day. And when the beaches are that nice, especially when you're a surfer like me, you don't get tired of them. But also at the same time, a really interesting experience that I had growing up in Hawaii was experiencing a lot of racism as a middle-class white man. So in my school, probably about 15% white, and then everything else was everything from Hawaiian to Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, Samoan, Polynesian. And so experiencing a lot of that racism growing up made my upbringing difficult in a lot of ways, and really did influence a lot of, who I ended up becoming in my younger years. So it was an interesting aspect of growing up in Hawaii. But by the time I was 14, I was ready for a different experience, and lucky that I got to move out of there and then move to Washington, D.C. But yeah, it was paradise, and also had its rougher elements, but I'm grateful for all of it.
Yeah, that's crazy. You mentioned about how I guess you were bullied, because usually you see it the opposite way around, where the majority is the the white individual or white race, and then it's the ethnic minorities which are the ones that are subject to that type of situation or context to grow up in. But yeah, I mean that's something that can definitely stay with you. So do you still think about that now in terms of helping shape the character that you've become, or is that kind of very much in the past and it's just a memory of that's in the distant future?
No, yeah, I think it's something that I think less about, but that I think that so many of those experiences on the more kind of like challenging, traumatic side of our life, in terms of how we can have appreciation for them, is because ultimately I feel that they give us the ability to empathize with the experience of others. And so having experienced what it's like to feel judged based on this color of my skin, walking into a classroom, going into social engagements, I have a little bit more of a taste of what that might be like for someone who is Black, brown. And so I think that because it is something that I got to experience, and I had that embodied experience of what it felt like to be ostracized for something as simple and surface level as my skin, it gives me a heightened ability to empathize, and ultimately I think have compassion for people who might experience that same type of prejudice today, which, is certainly happening in many parts of the world.
Yeah, I think it's crazy, the idea of race. As I've grown up and I've started to think about things more in it, and had time and space to breathe and see things from my own perspective, it's like race is just like the very first layer that you see of a person. It means literally nothing, and as you go deeper and deeper, you start to have more compassion. You realize actually we're all pretty much the same, and we've just been put into these meat suits that look different, but fundamentally we're all kind of facing the same problems. I don't know if you found that growing up, that actually race is kind of just the doorway into the person. It doesn't actually define anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I deal a lot with labels. I think we'll probably talk about a little later, but the idea of masculinity. And oftentimes when we talk about masculinity, we'll flow into other areas. So whether that is age, whether that is sexuality, whether that is race. And again, what we try and uncover is that, we say it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't inherently mean anything, but because of the cultures and societies and people that we were raised with, we associate new meanings with those things. And so we oftentimes make them mean things. And a lot of times we're not aware of those things. But what I'm most fascinated by is helping people to understand those types of labels of race, gender, sexuality, because we exist in societies that use those labels, and people make general associations about what those mean, why they're important. And so to operate in society, it's helpful to have a fundamental understanding of those things. But ultimately, when it comes to understanding ourselves as individuals, when it comes to understanding who you are, those labels are going to be incredibly limiting for my ability to understand who V is, to understand who Andrew is. And that's what so much of our work is about, is understanding these labels so that we can transcend them all together and get down to the base of who you really are, which what I want to know, what I am is not the fact that I'm a white 33-year-old Caucasian man. It's that, you know, I have dreams and I have values and I have priorities and I have my actions of what I've already done and what I'm going to do next. And I think that in terms of how I choose to see people and define them, those are my anchors. That's what I really look for.
Yeah, there's a lot that you just covered there, but that's exactly it. Those are the things that don't have a face, so to speak. That makes us different from one another. We all have dreams, we all have aspirations, goals, desires, struggles, and those sorts of overarching things are the ones that kind of connect us more deeply. And you've done that. You know, you've connected with other people a lot more deeply, and I think that's what fundamentally is the foundation of all of the businesses you've created. So I want to ask you a little bit more about that, but just before we get into that, how did you end up in Washington then? Did your parents decide to move, or what was the situation there?
Yeah, you know, I had a stroke of insight when I was 13 that I actually give myself a pat on the back for, is I realized that I was really shy and really introverted. And I had one friend, his name was Harry. He was awesome. He's still doing great. But I just realized that I was really stunted socially. And in terms of just enjoying my life, I really wasn't. And so when my parents divorced, my father was moving to Washington, D.C. And I really just had this realization that, you know, if I wasn't happy with my life and I didn't change anything, my life wasn't going to change. And so when my father moved to DC, I realized that it was this opportunity, at least in my, naive 13-year-old brain, that if I could go to a new place, I could be a new person. And so I went to Washington, DC, and I was like, okay, what scares me? And so it was talking to girls. And so the first time I went out with like the JV football team, I went out and I started talking to girls. And lo and behold, being a white kid from Hawaii and Virginia was much cooler than being a white kid in Hawaii. And so, you know, that actually went a lot better than I had anticipated. But so I basically moved to Virginia because I was trying to recreate myself without actually articulating that that's what I was doing. But it was a really transformational move for me.
That's a deep insight to have at 13 though, because when most people think about, you know, what they're doing at 13, it's just like, you know, watching TV or going out with their friends. It's just not, you're not in a state of reflection or thinking about the future at all.
I think that that's the thing, is that when I was in the moment, I didn't have these words to articulate the experience that I was going through. It was just, again, I was unhappy and I registered at some, you know, subversive level that if I didn't change something, I was going to continue to be unhappy, and I didn't want that. And so I just started doing things that scared me. And ultimately, you know, brushing up against those edges allowed me to grow, allowed me to become more social, and really grow into like the next stage of my development, which was one that was much more focused on seeking validation and approval and that sense of belonging to determine my own value, which had its own issues. And was then the next thing that I needed to grow out of, was like understanding that my own value wasn't determined by the girls or guys that could tell me that I was cool or smart, but was really learning to have respect for my own voice and to speak my own truth. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's it's interesting that you started so early on, because then it kind of lays the foundation subconsciously for all the things to come in your life thereafter, you know. So when did you first realize that actually you want to create a business that's for the benefit of others, for purpose, not just for profit? Because typically it's just for profit, right? Most people start, especially in this day and age, you know, you've got Facebook ads, Instagram ads, and so many people pushing stuff that's like get rich quick kind of thing, where you're working from your laptop. But just knowing the little bit that I do about you, that wouldn't appeal to you at all, as it doesn't to me as well, likewise. So what actually drove you to want to create something that's actually of fundamental value?
Yeah, it was a very singular moment. So I went to Virginia Tech for college, and from that moment, when I realized that I could basically get the approval and validation of other people by partying, by being the social guy, by being with women, I really started to define myself by those things. And where it was very exciting, right before I graduated from college, I connected with my first real mentor. He's this guy named Steve Robbins. He was a career consultant in an Ivy League school. And he was the first person who introduced me to the idea of happiness versus pleasure. He said, do you know the difference between happiness and pleasure? And I was like, no idea. And he said, okay, so happiness is that which is long lasting and fulfilling. He said, pleasure is that which is exciting, but ultimately fleeting. And he gave me that context, and he said, okay, so what makes you happy? And I was like, money, women, partying. And he was like, no, think about the context again. And so I looked at it again, and I was like, oh, well, I guess that's just pleasure. And I realized that in my life, I had a lot of this pleasure. I was doing a lot of it, but that because it was so fleeting, it was like this roller coaster. Is that I would have the high, and then I would have the crash, because it didn't actually make me feel good about myself the way that I was showing up in the world. And so I had taken a job, funny enough, with the Trump Hotel Corporation that just opened up a hotel in Chicago. And I read this book called Into the Wild about this guy, Christopher McCandless, who basically graduates from Emory University and decides to hitchhike across the country in this journey to find truth, understanding about who he is in the world. And so while I did not hitchhike across the country, my dad was actually moving to Alaska. And so I decided to renege on my job offer, and we drove across the country for about 2 months together. And on that trip, I had this fortuitous conversation with my dad about pride. And my dad was talking about his time in the military as an experimental test pilot, and just filled with a sense of pride. And he pushed it back to me, and he asked me a question of, what's the last thing you've done that you're proud of? And when I thought about the last thing, I get goosebumps even talking about it right now. I really didn't have anything. And I just sat there for probably 15 minutes. And I had won some intramural sports championships and did fun things for like my fraternity, but it was nothing that was a sustained period of engagement that I was really proud of. And then after about 20 minutes, I went back to this internship that I had when I was a junior in college. And I worked with this organization that did adaptive athletics. So it's sports for young people with disabilities. And when I did that internship, I thought it was fun because I was raising money, and I was being social and planning parties, and I was, playing ice hockey with kids with disabilities and helping them to go water skiing. And it was just a fun internship. But actually, as I looked at where I was now, looking back to now 3 years in the past, and my body was filled with this sense of pride over what I had done. It had been 3 years. And I look back at how I felt and the energy that I had, that I was actually staying late at work for the first time, that I was actually, going the extra mile and flyer bombing North Beach in Chicago with like tens of thousands of flyers to raise money for these kids, and raising tens of thousands of dollars. And so it never registered with me in college, because I was so focused on all these external things like money and like seeking the approval of so many other people. I was like, oh, wow, well, that time I spent with this organization, my dad just looks at me and he says, why don't you do more of that? And I realized that in a time in my life where I had no idea what I wanted to do, that when I helped people, when I was giving back to these kids, I actually felt good about myself. And so because I didn't know anything else, that one grain of truth was enough to really propel me forward and say, I'm going to go and do more of this work, which led me to start working in soup kitchens in DC, which led me to throw my first event, which led me to then basically go to my first entrepreneurial conference and meet my first major donor. And then we started Dreams for Kids DC. And now it's one of the largest adaptive athletic providers in Washington, DC, working with everything from the DC United to the Washington Redskins to the Wizards. But it was that single grain of truth that when I helped others, I had that sense of pride, is that I had that sense of fulfillment. And ultimately, it's like, again, when I talk to so many people now, the first question that I ask them when they're thinking about a career change or creating more purpose in their career, it's not what do you want to do? What do you want to be good at? It's how do you want to help people? And I think it's one of the best questions to really anchor people into something that they fundamentally care about, that's going to give them that sustainable source of motivation and purpose to create, to work hard, to push themselves forward. And that was certainly my experience, is that when I understood that, being able to share how sports had impacted my own life with kids who oftentimes don't have the experience, I had the motivation to be better, to be more present than I ever had in my entire life. And then that just propelled me into, even more of these businesses down the road.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that's a really good place and solid foundation to start from, which is asking the question of how do you want to help people? Because that then drives you into making a social business almost, that's going to benefit people and create impact.
Excuse me.
No, it's cool.
Go ahead.
Andrew, just choking on some water. Choking on some water there. But yeah, no, we're good. We're good. No, I was just saying, it ultimately drives you to create a business that's going to actually have impact, and not be one of these businesses where you're just making money from your laptop and you end up feeling, I guess,
empty.
no, yeah, that's the word. Yeah, I was going to say worthless, but that's the wrong word to use. It's empty. Yeah, and I think, I haven't been in the position that I'm about to explain, but I can only imagine. All these people, millionaires and billionaires, who end up committing suicide or who are really empty inside based on what they share in their story, and it's okay. I've got all this money, but what social connections have I got? What real relationships have I got? Because no one really wants to be in your circle when you're at that kind of level. You're almost feeling as if it's just you. No one else kind of understands you because you haven't bothered to bring anyone else up with you, along
Yeah.
the way. So it makes
Well,
it difficult.
another really helpful frame here is that people want things because of how they think it will make them feel. And I'll say that one more time. People want things because of how they think it'll make them feel. People want to be rich because they think that when they do that, they'll be happy. They think that they'll be stress-free. They won't have to worry about money anymore. All these other things. So I think oftentimes what's such a helpful anchor of where it is that you're going is, how do I want to feel? You know what I mean? I just want to be present. I want to feel connected. I want to feel motivated. I want to have a sense of purpose. When you understand how you want to feel, I want to feel financially secure. Like, those feelings are such a better motivator of your action than success or wealth or these things. But it's like, you want those things because of how you subconsciously perceive they're going to make you feel. So just ask yourself, how do I want to feel? And then you get a much clearer track of what can I do that actually brings those feelings into my life.
So just to I guess bring it down to a very step-by-step level. So if someone's in your position and they're feeling like, okay, cool, I definitely want to start a business that's going to impact people, but I don't know how to start because the vision is so big or it seems so overwhelming. I mean, what were the steps that you shared when you were sitting in the car with your dad? You thought, okay, I'm going to take action and execute on this. What follows?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and we can start even before someone, because let's start before the person who has an idea of what they wanted to do. Because I had this experience with adaptive athletics. And so that's the process of benchmarking that we can talk about. But some of the best questions that someone can ask who's in this place where they say, look, I know I don't want to work for somebody else. I know that I no longer want to contribute into a business or a system that I don't really believe in, that doesn't feel like a contribution that I'm proud of. Then some of the best questions to ask yourself is start with the first one that I just mentioned, which is, how do I want to help people? If you look back in your life, and it doesn't have to be something that's focused on, again, like the depths of service of like feeding malnourished children around the world or anything like that. But it can be, I actually love helping people to learn and grow, like being on a podcast like you are. Like, you ask yourself, what do I want to do? And you're like, well, I love personal development and I want to share these ideas with other people. It's like, when I think about service, it's helpful to think about it from two ways. There's helping people to get their basic human needs, food, water, shelter, helping people to get those things. But service is also helping people to transform, helping people to evolve, helping people to literally kind of transcend and elevate consciousness. Those are still forms of service, and you can basically deliver that in both ways. So how do I want to help people? The next is, basically, what do I want to be best at? Is like the idea of, what do I just enjoy learning about on my free time? What are the articles that you just find yourself reading? Whether that's something about like comedy, whether that's something that's about writing, whether that's something that's about interpersonal dynamics, which is like a personal passion of mine, all the way to some sport. But those things that you're passionate about learning about and exposing yourself to those industries is so direct. And then, I mean, when I think about the best place to start in any specific industry, it is oftentimes to actually challenge yourself to say, who has achieved success in a way that I respect or admire? So if you're looking at a specific industry, is to look at the person. And so if you're getting into podcasting, who is a podcaster in a specific arena who has achieved success in the same way? And if you actually reach out to them, if you look at an entrepreneur who's doing something in the realm of social entrepreneurship who you really admire, is that one of the most effective ways to fast track your career and build your network, if you say that you don't have any right now, is to reach out to those people, but to completely get rid of the line, let me pick your brain, or I'd love to talk to you, is that if you are approaching people from a place of extracting value to start, your network is going to stay stagnant. You're never going to get any responses back. And so what you want to do is completely shift your mindset into how can I contribute value and acknowledge the people that I support. And so I've created this system called the DAO of email. So it's TAO. And if you literally write this down, the structure for any LinkedIn message, any email that you're sending out is TAO. So T stands for thank. And you just start by thanking them for their time. And this is something that seems so simple, but it's one sentence that will fundamentally transform the way that your email is read. And it just says, hi, X, my name is V, and I just wanted to say, I'm sure you're busy, so thank you so much for taking the minute to read this message. Just by acknowledging them with your first sentence transforms their appreciation of how conscientious you are. It's going to make them want to read the rest of your email. So you just thank, one sentence. And the second is acknowledge. So acknowledge is speaking to something specific that they've done. So before you go into talking about what you've done, why it's cool, what you want from them, it's acknowledging. So it's like, V, I saw your episode with Mass and Kip, and I just loved what you guys talked about in this thing, XXX. So now they've said a specific thing that you've done, and anytime someone's telling you why you're awesome, it's going to feel good. So now you're moving into O. And rather than asking for something, a lot of people say, it's like, what could I possibly have to offer Tim Ferriss or some famous social entrepreneur? And basically what you say is you always have a couple of things you can offer. And that is your time and your network. And so your time is that, I'm in Brooklyn. If you're ever doing any events in this arena, I'd be happy to donate my time to be a resource, however it makes sense for you guys. So it's just saying that I'm happy to just donate my time on any projects. Or if you have a specific skill, whether that's as a content creator, social media management, it's I really love what you guys are doing. If I can ever offer my time to be a resource, I'd be more than happy to get involved. And also, even if you're on Facebook and you have 500 friends, 500 friends is a helpful amount of people to blast out a podcast, to blast out an event, and say, if you guys have anything coming up that you want me to blast out, I'd be happy to share that with my network. So now what you've done before you've even come into who you are, what you're talking about, is then you get to say, it's that, and I've started my own podcast, which is this. If you're ever interested in being a guest, we'd love to have you on. But again, appreciate any time you can take to follow up. And so what you're doing, if you're trying to expand your network, if you're trying to connect with people who have achieved success in the way that you would like, is positioning yourself as a resource, someone who can help. And that is how you grow your network. That is how you build relationships rather than just doing something transactional. And that's the fundamental difference from the most successful people, in my opinion, is that they understand that sustainable relationships are the things that are going to have the most profound impact. Is that if you are just approaching your relationships and your connections with people as transactional, what's the thing that I can get from this person? It's ultimately you're going to fall short, versus the people who understand that it really is a long game, and establishing those relationships will come back to you in the long haul and really move your career forward.
Yeah, I love everything you just said there, because that's exactly what, when people have asked me about how I've got certain guests on the podcast and built a network, etc., and they're starting just from day one, it's like, it's word for word everything you just said is what I share. And there was a quote that I actually shared when I read it, I think a few months back on a couple of podcasts, which was life gives to givers and takes from takers. And to me, it just came second nature that, okay, if I want to build a relationship with this person, the first thing is to give either time or attention, right? So I can give my time, as you said, donate time or attention to the person, looking at what they've built, what they've put out in the world, and how I can serve to that, give to that, either from my network, now that the network's grown, or something as basic as, oh, by the way, I saw that, there's this article or this book in the space that you're also in. I wondered if you'd read it. It's really good. Just recommend it. Something along those lines. There's always something that you can do to provide to that person's world in some shape or form. So I love that you shared that. In terms of, I guess, moving forward from the it's called Ability List, right?
So that one's actually called Dreams for Kids DC. And then,
okay.
Yeah. And then so basically, which is adaptive athletics. And then Ability List was basically a modernized Craigslist for people with disabilities. So it's a place where they can go and contribute the resources in their hometown to create a more accessible city, with people who are receiving the services actually the ones who are building the site themselves. So as opposed to them just receiving stuff from another community being the recipient, they're inherently the creators of the site.
Right. So if I was to, for example, if I was to go on it right now, how would I give to that or benefit from that?
Well, it's the idea of contributory community. And so, I'm a longtime Burning Man participant. I met my wife there, really. But when people feel as though that they can contribute, I've talked about how in my own life, I found my sense of fulfillment, of pride, by experiencing the reality that I could help someone else. And until that time, I really didn't know that. I really didn't feel good about myself. I really didn't have a sense of self-worth because I had been so focused on my own experience, feeling as good as I could. But I think that the most rewarding, fulfilling experience we can give someone is the experience of helping another human. And so the way that we built that site is that if you are a person with muscular dystrophy living in New York City, you'd be able to go on that site, type in muscular dystrophy resources and find them. But also it could say, do you want to add something? And so if you have a service provider, an organization or a nonprofit that has been helpful to you, you just add that information in there. So now other people can find that as well. And it's that contribution that ultimately connects people to that community, but also fills them with that sense of pride of saying, oh, I've done something valuable for someone else, which makes them feel good. And so that idea of contribution is such a powerful one for community. And again, we've talked about giving professionally, but the exact same principle is true in our personal lives and in our social lives. It's for people who are hanging out with friends that are no longer serving them, that are no longer really having the conversations that are most interesting and generative for where they've grown to. The idea of moving into new social circles, whether that's going to a new event like Daybreaker, whether that's going to a meetup, is the difference between going to that event and listening to a speaker versus reaching out to the organizer and saying, hey, I'm happy to come an hour early and help to just take tickets. It's now you're a part of that event. So now the people who are organizing that event, the speakers, they become people who are on your level. You're actually contributing, you're creating this experience as opposed to just taking it in. And that contributory mindset in the business world, but also in our social lives, is one of the most significant things we can do to really impact how we're able to build relationships that are serving us.
Yeah, it's so true what you said about, feeling like you're part of the experience rather than just extracting from it. Because when you're actually giving time or attention or resources to that particular person, then you actually feel like you've helped actually co-create that whole experience for all of the people who are benefiting. So it's amazing that feeling that can come, and it's funny because it's free. 99.9% of the time it's a free feeling. You're just giving your help, and then you see the effect that your help's given. And
Yeah.
there's actually I was talking to one of my friends about this. There's actually a folder that I keep on my phone called Keep Going, for the days where I'm feeling down or depressed or upset. And it's a screenshot of all the messages that I've received from some of the content I've put out or introduction that I've made, which has then gone on to they've become business partners, or something's happened as a result of something I've done. I'm like, wow, okay, cool. I'm actually doing stuff that's helping people. Let me just look back, ground myself again, remember what I've done, and then keep going. So yeah. I wonder if you do anything like that, because I know we're talking about the roller coaster of emotions earlier on, and
Yeah.
it'd be interesting to hear if you do anything like that to ground yourself and to deal with those sorts of emotions that come to you.
Well, I'm very fortunate that, a lot of my time is spent helping men specifically to navigate their emotional experience and really learn from it and kind of turn those into something that's productive. So I am very fortunate that about 2 years ago, I started a men's group with eight guys here in Brooklyn, primarily entrepreneurs. And every single week we come together to experience, explore, and express the emotion that's most present for us. And so we've become very good at navigating our way of being through the emotion that is most present. And it is a way of experiencing ourselves and also communicating that is not taught, but incredibly helpful to just explore who we are and what's going on for us on a deeper level. Because, as I always help people to think about themselves, is the way that we go about our lives is very much directed by our conscious experience. And so if you think about the totality of who you are, it's like, so V's conscious experience is like here, up. And then you've got your subconscious experience, and that's like the area that's like, just like right here. But the rest of you and who you are is this unconscious experience that goes all the way to your toes. And this is all the emotional experience, all the stories you tell yourself, all these things that are just happening under the surface that you're not even aware of. They're impacting how you're responding to things emotionally, why you're getting frustrated from things, where your insecurities come from. And so being able to dive deeper into this emotional experience is how we're really able to process a lot of that in the unconscious. And when we process a lot of those unconscious, undesirable emotions, we're much more capable of interacting with the world as it is, as opposed to it being processed and filtered through so much of the unconscious experience that we've never really taken the time to get to know.
Yeah, most definitely. And how was that idea born? Like, how did that actually come about to create a men's group? Because it's something I'm finding more and more actually is a lot of men want and need.
Yeah, absolutely. So about 4 years ago, I had a crazy experience at Conscious Capitalism, which is an event for some of the top social entrepreneurs on the planet come together. And I was there, and I was kind of holding court. I was talking to a few entrepreneurs, and then this man walks up to me and he was like, "Hey, I was watching how you were communicating with these people, and it just looks like you were practicing this thing called Gestalt. Do you know what it is?" And I was like, "No, what is that?" And he was like, "Oh, well, it was this like therapeutic modality, but then turned into this communication framework. And it's just all about authenticity and curiosity." And I was like, "No." And so he's kind of a benefactor of this modality. And he just really believes in it to basically heal the world. And so he ended up paying for me to go to this week-long immersion into Gestalt. And so I went and I learned about this framework. And when I first experienced it, if I were to synthesize what it is that, again, it's a framework for communication that's focused on the here and now, which is just present. So I'm just talking to V. I'm not worried about what's happened in the past, what's happened in the future. I'm focused on curiosity. Curiosity is, what do I want to know about you, and what do I want to know about my own experience in this situation? So I just seek to understand at the deepest level. And authenticity is, whatever I am thinking and feeling is real and valid, and I give it a voice. And this is one of the most powerful things, is that, so often we have little feelings and little thoughts that we hold on to because we think that it will make other people uncomfortable, that they can't hold on to it. But what happens is that when we don't express ourselves, we're no longer being fully honest. And when we don't express ourselves, we hold on to those things like weights. It's like, how long has something knocked on your way? And then you think about that thing for days or weeks after it's happened. That's a literal weight that's being processed in your brain that's keeping you from being fully authentic, fully present in every conversation that happens after that. And so I uncovered Gestalt, and it became this modality that was, I'll tell a quick story about it because it's so powerful for people to really grasp the power of this. So when I went to this conference, it was short, it's like 20 entrepreneurs who are going there. Basically what happens is on the first day, I meet this woman who's this really successful media mogul. And I really wanted to connect with her. I thought she was really interesting, but also, she could be helpful to my business. And I don't know if you've ever been there, but that moment when you meet someone who you kind of want to be friends with, or that you want to connect with, and they just have no interest in it whatsoever. So they're just like giving you the cold shoulder, short answers, not asking any questions back. And I kind of internalized that. And like, it sucks. And everyone's had that experience. And I internalized that, and I was like, oh man, she just doesn't think that I'm successful enough. She doesn't think that I'm cool enough. She's not interested in hanging out with me. And so I internalized that, and that kind of makes me feel bad about myself. And then I'm just avoiding her for the next kind of day and a half. And then as I start to learn more about these principles of Gestalt, of authenticity, what are you thinking and feeling? You give it a voice. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm going to express this to her. So at one of our breaks, we go to the coffee machine. And as we walk over, I walk over and I was like, hey, and I'm not going to say her name to protect your privacy, but I walk over and I was like, hey, just want to let you know that like, I really love what you've built in the world, and I've been making an effort to connect and just never felt like you're really reciprocating. And so I'm going to stop because it doesn't really make me feel good. And if you're interested in picking it back up, just let me know and I'd be happy to chat. And I say this to this woman and she starts bawling. She just starts weeping, like right there at the freaking coffee stand. And I was like, what did I say? Like, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? And she looks back at me and she's like, I'm so sorry. I don't want to be here this weekend. I'm being sued by my co-founder. My boyfriend and me are in a fight. And it was at this awakening moment that I had this whole story about how I was not good enough, how she didn't want to hang out with me. And she was having this completely different experience that had almost nothing to do with me. And basically what this just shifted and how I started to perceive the world is, how often am I responding to a narrative that I'm creating in my head that has absolutely no basis in reality? How much of my reality is just a story that's holding me back from being honest, from sharing my truth, from being who I want to be in the world? And so after that, I was hooked. I was like, okay, Gestalt is this powerful thing. It's got 80 years of wisdom behind it. And then about 2 years ago, I connected with this guy named Dan Doty, who started something called Everyman. So Everyman does men's retreats. And one of the best things that they created was this framework. I'd highly recommend it for anyone listening. It's an open source curriculum for men's groups. And so it shows men how they can create a men's group. And so I use the curriculum that they created for men's groups. And basically what they're doing is almost like applying some of these Gestalt principles to the somatic experience, to the emotions. And so it took this stuff that I was really passionate about and framed it in the context of just men doing it with men, focusing on emotions. And within the first 2 sessions of these 8 guys getting together, sharing completely transparently what's going on in their life, their fears, what's not working, like what they're sad about, what they're angry about, what they're happy about. We felt more connected. I felt more connected than just about any other time in my life. And I just realized like we felt so much less alone, but also we felt relieved of this weight of the emotion that we're not expressing. And what Fritz Perls, the founder of Gestalt, says is like that which is not expressed is suppressed. And when we suppress emotion, this is the stuff that doesn't just basically impact us, but it like leaks out into our experience. It's us snapping at our partner. It's us not doing the thing we need to do. Or as it gets worse, it's us doing self-destructive behavior. It's us lashing out in violence. And so not only is it helpful for just basically being able to act the way that we'd like to in alignment with who we really are, but it's also, I believe, a public service of when men know how to do this type of emotional work, they're less likely to have these emotional outbursts and end up hurting other people.
That's that's very deep stuff. And I think the last thing you said there was, it benefits those that are around them. And we talk a lot about, when I was in the group that I joined a few months back, the retreat we were talking about off air, that really talked about, breaking the cycle, being someone who doesn't pass on the same repetitive behaviors, emotions, habits, and that really stuck with me. And I thought, okay, the more we started talking and thinking and feeling, the more I realized actually that's why I was brought here, because it was my intuition that kind of led me there. There's a whole story behind that, but I was one of the youngest people that was at the event, and the event I'm talking about is Brave Soul for those people who are just listening in. And when I got there, I was like, oh man, like there's people from all over the world that are here. I was pumped until I got there and realized that everyone's much older than me. And I was like, oh, am I at the wrong event? Did I waste my money? Am I supposed to really be here? Like what, everyone's got kids and partners and much more life experience. Like what am I doing here? Is this going to really be for me? And as I went on throughout the days, I realized actually, this is a plus, if anything, my age, because I can actually implement this stuff a lot faster and a lot quicker than people who have only realized this maybe at 40, 50, 60, who are doing it now, realizing actually they don't want to pass this on to their grandchildren. And, I realized, well, if I can really internalize this stuff now and look in those deep and dark places as a man, then not only can I help myself, but my friends, my family, and ultimately the family that I have in the future. So it's amazing work to do, but I guess you have to be courageous, if that's the right word, because crying is not manly. Being upset is not manly. Being depressed or, saying that you want to talk about certain conversations or certain topics is not manly. So I know you were talking about labels earlier on, so I don't know how that plays into the way you think and feel and help others overcome those sort of labels.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. It's when we talk about courage, that's oftentimes one of the things that we talk about at the dinner table. And you also talk about breaking the cycle. So we have a ceremony that we've created around, we use those exact words. But another interesting thing to consider, especially as we're talking about breaking the cycle of especially kind of the patrilineal habits and patterns, so things that have been passed down to us from our fathers. And another thing that we can also do in that is to consciously think about what it is that we're carrying forward. So what are the things that we have experienced that are actually going to consciously live on through us? So not only what are the things that I experienced that I'm breaking the cycle of, but really I think one of the most powerful things that we can do as men to define our own experiences, as I always use the term humans, because I think ultimately that's more important, is really what will you take from the experience that you've had with your father, and you get to decide. That's what you control, is not what's happened to this point, but what is it that you will consciously take away from that. And in terms of, how we create space for men to do this, to transcend these barriers, is the first step is really just becoming clear on what these invisible restrictions are that we place on ourselves. Is one of the exercises that I often do with men and with women is I'll have them basically bring out 2 pages, and I'll say, write masculine on the top of the left page, and then write feminine on top of the right page. And then I'll say, stream of consciousness, don't stop anything. Don't think about this. Just write free flow thoughts as they come out. 30 seconds. What are masculine emotions and qualities? And then basically just people just write all these things. And then I was like, okay, now don't stop. Go to the feminine side, 30 seconds. What are masculine emotions and qualities? And what happens is we uncover that we all have these pretty shitty, fucked up biases. Sorry, I don't know if I can cuss.
You can,
but
yeah,
it's
you can, yeah.
these pretty shitty, shallow biases. It's men are aggressive and violent and strong. Women are nurturing and empathetic and emotional. And so it's when we just see like, oh, I have what I'll call like the higher self, which is again, the conscious brain that's like, here's who I am, and here's what I think about women, and here's what I think about, people of different genders and ethnicities. But what's so important is understanding what these biases are that are just so hardwired into us because of our experience. And so the first step is coming to grips with, how willing am I to basically address like the limitations that I put around myself of, how many men of our generation, grew up expressing feminine traits and being told, oh, that's gay. Right. And like how much they resist this idea of the emasculation that was portrayed onto the sexual preference of gay. And so it's understanding what are these biases that we have. And then when we understand what these biases are, these labels that, when earlier in life, we don't have a fully formulated sense of who we are. And when we don't have a fully formulated sense of who we are, we want to latch on to these labels because we want to be seen a specific way. And so if something is masculine, right, and that is strong and that is this and this is this, if we want to be seen a certain way and then that group is associated with that, we're going to latch on to that because we want our identity to be associated with it. And so what I talk about is that the whole goal of this is really working towards a creation of an identity on a much firmer ground that is created by you. And what we talk about again is that so you understand what these labels are, what they mean to you, how they've impacted how you've shown up in the world. It's like one of the questions you always ask is, what have you sacrificed to be a man, to appear as a man? You know what I mean? It's like writing down, what are my biases about what it means to be manly? And then when we move past that, it's you understand what those labels are. And then we say that to really be who you need to be in the world, it's understanding your identity created on your own terms. And that is, what do I think it means to be a man? That is, what are my values? That is, what are my priorities? What are my dreams? And that what happens is there's something that drives a lot of the work that we do in the Junto, which is my platform for men. And it's based around this thing called the identity model of change. And the identity model of change basically says that as humans, we do the types of things that align with the type of person that we think we are. We do the types of things that align with the type of person we think we are. And, if we associate ourselves with all these labels, white, black, man, woman, and we have all these preconceived notions about what those mean, then our actions are going to be driven subconsciously by all this shit that's been cultivated externally by society, by our father, by our rites of passage growing up. And so what's so important, according to this model, is saying, well, who am I on my own terms? Because if I haven't established really who I am for myself, other people are going to do that. And then that sense of self is going to drive how you actually show up in the world. So it's like, especially values work, I think is some of the most foundational work that people can do to transcend some of those labels and open up to really being themselves.
Yeah, it's what you said there about the belief system driving, being the underlying factor of all the actions that we take. And it's true. And I've had a number of these conversations just with myself, but also with friends when we're having similar conversations. And just like, it's almost like a GPS, your value system. It dictates the people in your life, the resources, the experience, the way that you feel, emotions, the way you handle certain situations. It's just all of those decisions will be based on what you deem important, which are your values. And so if you can boil them down to maybe 2 or 3 fundamental things you will not break away from, then that becomes a structure of your life. And whatever you create or build or feel or experience will be within the realms or within the walls of those values. And so I think when you look at a person's life, you can see what they value. You know, someone who on their downtime would spend their time at a pub, which many of them do in the UK. Not that it's a good or bad thing. It's just the thing, right? Like drinking, smoking, socializing over alcohol, compared to someone who may want to spend time reading or watching a movie or going for a walk. Or it's just they deem different things valuable to them, and that comes out in their actions. So I think what I've learned over the last few months, especially, is the power of just taking time to just reflect and slow down, because we live in a society that's just so fast paced, especially, you know, New York, London, all of the big cities where, especially London, talking from my own experience, where people are rushing for work in the morning, rushing home, rushing to get to places. They're not taking the time to be present, to speak to you, to acknowledge you. It's crazy. It's like a whirlwind that never stops unless you actually take a deep breath and take a step out of the whirlwind purposely to just wind down, relax, and to balance the yin and yang, right? Every day you're moving so fast and outward, you know, you're putting your energy out into the world. You need to bring it back in and recharge yourself for the next day. Otherwise, eventually you will burn out. You will have depression. You will have bouts of anxiety or whatever it is, because you haven't taken the time to just recuperate. And again, I think a part of it is labels. Oh, you know, I don't take the time to meditate or to breathe or do yoga or whatever it might be, because that's stuff that you know, weirdos do or women do. I go out for a drink with the guys. I watch sports. I do this, that, and the other. And it comes down to the way that we perceive the world and certain situations. So yeah, it's interesting.
It's important work. I mean, if I'll offer, if everyone walks away from this podcast and they do one thing, I'd say that this piece is so fundamental. Especially, I imagine you have a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of consultants, basically people who were listening to the show.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the idea of how many of you who have a company have company values? Probably pretty much everybody. It's like one of the first things that you do. But in terms of your personal values and actually having there's not scientific, but around 5 to 10 core values that are actually written down, thought through somewhere on your wall. If you're in a romantic relationship, your relationship values of what are the things that both of us value that drive how we show up for one another, that we can look back to when we're in a fight and say, am I actually acting into these? And a helpful frame that I'll give you to actually explore your values is that a lot of times it can just be kind of theoretical. It's like, oh, so what does V need to do to be V in the world? And you can come up with a lot of words, but a much more helpful exercise, a way to explore this is actually through what I would call your peaks and your valleys. And so your peaks is what I would do is I would ask V. So V, what is one of the moments in your life where you were most you? You were just the most expressed, you felt the best. Like, so what actually comes up for you? What's like a moment in your life where you were just like on an absolute high? What would it be?
I would say public speaking. Actually, earlier this year, sharing my message. I definitely came away feeling high from that.
Where? Which event?
One last talk.
Okay, cool. So at one last talk where you shared some beautifully message about self-compassion in that. And so when you were giving that talk and you just finished it and people are clapping, what are the values of V that were being expressed in that talk?
Contribution. A sense of freedom, a weight being lifted. And my third value that I hold dearly to myself is self-development, personal development, growth.
Cool. Challenging yourself and everything.
Yeah, exactly. So, and those three are values that I try to embody in everything that I do. And that definitely ticked the box in those areas.
So you see what happens here is that, and V's, obviously done some of this work for himself, but if you've never done it before, it can be so fun and natural to do this, because all you do is you just sit around with your friends and it's like, what are the moments that have been the best moments of your life? Who doesn't want to talk about that? And you say, okay, so when you're in that moment, your best moments are your best moments because your values were being expressed. I guarantee it. I've done this with hundreds of guys, and it's like every single time, if you go to your best moments and say what value is being expressed, and this is how you got to start to see, oh, what are my values? In practice, as opposed to coming up with it theoretically, you say, what are the best moments of my life? That means that those are probably aligned with my values now. And then if you want to do it on the other side, you can go back to your valleys. I'm not going to make you talk about one of the worst experiences of your life right now. We can do that after the show. But you can go to basically some of the more challenging moments. And in those moments when you felt the worst, when you were depressed, when you were isolated, what values were being suppressed? So it's expressed with the peaks, and then it's suppressed with the valleys. And both ways are a helpful way for you to see what are your values that really do correlate with your experience.
That's an interesting lens to take for sure. Yeah. So I hope people, or I'm sure people will find that interesting if they actually take the time to sit and sit with that for a little while. Then they will come up with some pretty interesting stuff. Because one of the funny things actually, when I took the time to just journal, reflect, and to review things, I realized actually starting a podcast was always in line with the way that I was in the past. I just never saw it because in school I was always told off for talking too much. And doing a podcast, I realized actually I'm great at having conversations, and people have complimented me on it. And so it's built its own momentum because of the way that I've approached it and the way that I've built it. So that's just one of many things that when you look back and you realize actually some of these moments that come up in life, when you take the time to connect the dots, actually everything falls into place if you take the time to review it. So, and even the as well as the peaks, but the valleys as well. When you're down and depressed, there's always something to be learned from that situation, always, that you can come away and share with other people and with yourself moving forward. So, and there's almost a sense of pride of having gone through that challenge, coming out the other side and saying, you know what, I took this lesson away from it, and I worked for it. I had to feel that shitty to get the lesson. So now I'm proud to talk about what I went through, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so I was the last question that I was gonna actually ask was, you know, what would you give people to immediately take away to take action on so they could start? You've done that already, but yeah. So no, but just I guess one interesting thing for you is I think Mickey was saying that you're in the middle of a book as well, Social Flow, right? How's that going?
Yeah, so social flow is basically synthesizing a lot of the stuff that I've learned from Gestalt and also my time with men, which is my emphasis with men's work is all around communication. It's basically saying what parts of yourselves are you not sharing with the world, and what is the mechanism that we can use to turn social anxiety, insecurity into social confidence. And what I call that process is social flow. And social flow is the idea of you've all experienced the flow state before, whether that was playing sports, whether it's in the kitchen or just watching a movie or reading a book. But flow state is that state when you're so absorbed in what you're doing that the sense of self just completely evaporates and you just get filled with the focused energy to just be present and do the thing. I've been feeling one while I've been jamming with you. And so social flow is the idea that we can create those states with people. And there are specific things that we can focus on that allow us to create these states. And most of it is based around internal motivation. Is that so often when we're in conversation, we are aware of our perception of what other people are feeling or thinking, our beliefs about how likely people are to talk to us or respond a certain way. And so what social flow does is it's really these three core values in a turnaround that before any interaction, whether that's a sales call, whether you're going on a first date, whether I'm getting on a podcast, it's three simple questions that check you into your internal motivation about how you want to show up, what you're excited to talk about. And ultimately, when we learn to trust this process, we can train our mind to focus on this internal motivation in every single conversation. And it turns social situations into something that is fun, that is generative, that we feel like we're in control of, as opposed to something that feels anxiety inducing, out of our control, and energy draining. And so those three prompts that you really want to think about it. So if I'm getting ready for a podcast with V, question number one is, how do I want to feel? So when I'm on the show, I ask myself that question. How do I want to feel? I want to feel present and I want to feel loose, just ready to just express whatever's coming up. So I'm just here and I'm loose. So now I've got those two things that are anchoring. And by thinking about those things, when we put our attention on our intention, we're more likely to create the experience we want. So that's a fundamental thing. We're so often focused on what we don't want. The next is, what do I want to know? Is, if I walk into any conversation more curious about what I want to learn about somebody than how I want to be perceived, I'll immediately have a path to contributing value and to learning personally. And so when I walk in with V, I want to know what's the best podcast that he's done so far? What has he learned about growing the audience? What's been most effective? What's his dream? And so if you learn to curate and really cultivate curiosity like that, you're going to feel comfortable going into any conversation. And even people, which is, again, I work with a lot of really kind of high performing people, but they still have anxiety as they start start to move up the ladder and they're going to more exclusive conferences and events and boardrooms. But when you have curiosity of what you want to know about people, you can go into any conversation with any celebrity, any entrepreneur, and know that you can ask a question and contribute value. Because I mean, anytime someone's asking a question about yourself that's authentic, real, insightful, it's valuable. And so that's the curiosity piece. And the next one is just what's real. Is that if you just look inside and you paint your curiosity inwards and you say, what am I excited about? What's challenging? What am I feeling right now? What am I nervous about? And basically we create platforms for people to be more authentic about that experience, because so often people think that they need to try, and they don't. They just get out of the way and they connect with what's authentically in there. We're always feeling something. There's always something that's in there. And even if it is anxiety, I've created a lot of systems about how to express that in ways that's much more authentic and opens conversations up. And so, you know, those two things, which is how do I want to feel? What do I want to know? And what's real? If you ask yourself those before any situation, especially those where you have anxiety, it will fundamentally transform how you show up. And like what I tell people is someone who grew up with social anxiety, someone who is definitely kind of scared of talking to women, someone who even now where I give, you know, public presentations in front of thousands of people and I still get a tightness in my chest and I get worried, but it is that social anxiety is part of the human experience. It's that, you know, you have 50% of all Americans at least identify as shy. You've got about 13% that are dealing with severe social anxiety. So worrying what people think about us, worrying how people are going to respond to what we have to say, this is one of the most human impulses that we have. And so rather than judging it in ourselves, just saying like, oh, well, here I am being a human again. And then whenever you get that impulse, we learn to condition the response to, what do I control in the situation? And in any social situation, there's so much that you control. And the more that you focus on that, the better you're going to feel, the more deeply you're going to connect, and the more you're going to inspire people wherever you go.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the whole, you know, that whole concept, mastering that concept is just becoming more conscious of your actions, which is something that I've slowly started to do more and more. And you catch yourself actually at very minor situations, but major situations as well, when you're in social situations and not just by yourself. And you realize, actually, this is a habit. I'm going to stop and I'm going to change my reaction or my approach to the situation before I move any further. And the more you do that, the more you start to master your state, and you can actually change the direction that you take your life, essentially, because your life is just made up of a collection of habits and decisions. That's it, really. So there was something else I was going to. Oh yeah, this is what I was going to say. As you were talking, I was thinking about a Zen proverb that was shared on a video that I watched recently, and it was, when you want something, get out the way. And I didn't understand it straight away, and the more I let it sink in,
Love that, man.
The more I let it sink in, I was like, oh man, that's really good, because you know, when we're thinking about, yeah, the more
I love that. I'm writing it down.
It's good, because it's our perception to a situation, usually, that, you know, what you said earlier about the media mogul and your story to it, or your attachment to the situation that created the negative emotions, or the emotions that you didn't naturally want to feel. But none of it was really real. She was just going through her own stuff. It was not to do with you at all. And so if we can come to a place where we can actually master the fact that we're in control of our approach to a certain situation, and that if we can actually just allow the experience to flow through us, rather than, I need to control this, I need to think about why that happened, I need to justify this, I need to logically understand why that happened, you're just going to create chaos in your mind. And you then, as you said earlier, you start living from up here in your head, rather than a full body experience. You know, you can't just live here and everything else be dead. You have to have a full body experience for you to fully feel life, you know?
Yeah. Most of our effort in social situations is holding back. It's not because we're worried, but it's like you just said, get out of the way. Most of the resistance, like most of the weight that we hold, is just basically holding back all these parts that we think aren't there. And, you know, what I say is, not holding back, learning to put all of ourselves in there where we can fully be judged, is the only place where we can fully be accepted. And so it's such a powerful thing, man. And you know, one of the turnaround, which might be helpful, like as you're talking about that, is, have you ever had anyone on the show who's talked about Byron Katie and the work?
No.
Okay, cool. So this is, I always share this. It's, we've created kind of a twist on this that we call the reality check with social flow, but it's very similar and inspired by that experience I talked about at Gestalt. Is that so often we are either not taking action, or we're showing up really not fully as ourselves, because of these stories that we tell ourselves about people. And so a lot of times I use the example of, again, it's when you're walking into a really kind of like high value networking event, whether that be a conference, whether you're walking into a board with investors that intimidate you, whether you run into a celebrity in an elevator and you think that they're not going to be interested in you. Every single time what's happening in these situations is that you are responding to a story that you have told yourself about the situation. And that is, these people aren't going to think I'm smart. That is, this person who's a celebrity, Leonardo DiCaprio, doesn't want to talk to me. That is, when I'm walking to this board, it's like, oh, they don't think that I'm running the business well. And so what you can do is to get a hold of the story and come back into reality, where again, how I want to show up, what I want to know, and what I want to share, those are real. Those are things that are in you that you're defining. So you know those things. So what we don't know is the story. So all those things I just said, this person doesn't want to talk to me. This person doesn't think I'm attractive. You can run this thing through 4 simple questions, and it's called the work. And so the work starts by asking yourself, do I know that that's true? So this person's not going to want to talk to me. How often does that keep us from making that call, from sending the email? So can I know this is true? Well, I don't know. Second question, can you absolutely 100% know that it's true? No. You can never absolutely know that this story is true because you think it's in someone else's head. So you identify that you can't know it's true. Number 3, how do I act when I accept this as truth? So when I think that this person doesn't want to talk to me, how do I show up? I'm a little like anxious. I'm reserved. I probably don't even talk to that person. So we acknowledge that the story we're living into impacts the present that we're living in. And then the 4th one is, who would I be without this story? So if I didn't have this story about why I can't tell my wife this thing I've been thinking about, why this person isn't going to, like, who would I be? It's like, oh, well, I'd be confident. I'd be myself. I would like express myself. So now you express that. And then the last like turnaround, if you want to ask it, is just like, could the exact opposite be true? Could Leonardo DiCaprio think my company is really fucking cool? Yeah, totally. It's like, could my wife have something that she's been holding on to and not expressing? But when I say this, that she actually feels liberated and like she can tell me? Absolutely. And so that simple framework, and just focusing on the stories that you tell yourself that are impacting. And remember that again, is that the stories we tell ourselves impact the present that we're living in. And almost always it's for the worst. No one is living into stories and just saying, I am the best and everybody here loves me and I can just express myself fully. You know, if you're there, congratulations. But most people are not. They're living into these stories that limit who they are and how they can express themselves. And so in addition to becoming familiar with those 3 questions of how do I want to feel? What do I want to know? What do I want to share? Internal is debunking the story. Because once you debunk the story, now you're just playing in reality. And when it comes to reality, what enters and what fills that space is your internal motivation, is what you want to do. And as you get better, if you get better at that, you start to connect with people, you start to inspire them without so much effort. Because like you just said so beautifully, man, when you want something, get out of the way.
And when you remove those stories and you're living in the present, you're just, you're in the present moment, there's quantum possibility there. It's just that's if when everything else is removed, all the blocks are removed, now you're just left with possibilities. And that's the most amazing thing about it, is now you're thinking free without any limits. And in that space, what could you create? And then, you just go and write and journal and think and imagine and feel from that space. And it becomes this expansive thing where you're like, oh, okay, what else can I do? What else can I do? What else can I do? And you come from a place of serving more than, or a place of abundance more than scarcity, which is the place that I think everyone is trying to get to in some shape or form. But it's an amazing place to be because you feel like there's no limits, there's no cap, there's no friction there. Everything is just flowing,
Yeah. Well, and the last thing that I'll say on that too is, because I talked about the stories about the external world, but one thing to hold on to here is that we don't just have stories about the external world. We have theories about ourselves and about who we are. Oh, I'm just shy because my dad was. Oh, I'm an introvert and I'm drained by social situations. Oh, I'm just not a good public speaker. And so what's important is to not just inspect our stories about what other people are thinking or feeling, how they're going to respond. What are the theories that we have about ourselves? Because again, subconsciously, if we're saying that like, I'm just not a very focused person, I'm easily distractible. If you've got these theories, then again, those things impact how you show up in the world. We talked about identity before. And so it's important to, again, unpack those theories and create better ones for ourselves, in addition to unpacking the stories in the external world.
You know what I've slowly started to do, and I urge everyone to do this, and maybe you're doing this already, but take an inventory of your belief system. Like we look at our shopping list every single week, what we grocery list, you know, our current state of fashion and the clothes that we have and possessions and stuff. But how often do we look at our belief system and how old they are and how much they're not really serving us anymore? We need to upgrade those along with all the possessions that we're constantly upgrading around us. It'd be interesting to see what the world would look like if everyone was to do this kind of work, and to have some kind of servant leadership in their life to inspire others around them. And I thank you for you know, taking the initiative and the courage to do that in your own life.
Yeah, brother. Well, thank you very much. It's everything that I do is a product of my own experience. And like, I coach a lot of people on TED Talks and book proposals. And like, what I always say is like, I'm not looking for language to make what you want to say compelling. I'm just looking for the truth that is inside of you, that is so white hot and real that people aren't going to be able to look away. And you're going to be able to deliver it compellingly without a place of remembering it because it's real. And that, you know, coming back to my businesses, everything that I do has come from a place of sharing what I wish I had known. You know, it's like struggling with interpersonal dynamics and social confidence. So spending my time getting good at this and understanding the frameworks that would be most helpful to 16-year-old Andrew, like, I know why I'm doing this because I wanted this when I was younger. It's creating tribute, being able to create these videos for hundreds of thousands of people around the world. I received one of these when I was 27, and it fundamentally changed my relationship with my community, my sense of self-love. So now I get to share that with hundreds of thousands and soon like millions of people. It's, you know, when I look at men's work, I sat in that circle for, you know, a year, and I was like, this is the most powerful work I've ever done. And now I've created a space where, you know, we're liberating that to all different cities around the country and soon the world. So it's, when you look at, I like to think of it as the difference between purpose and a calling. Is that purpose is when you are attached to something that's greater than yourself, be that a community, a cause, an initiative, an organization. But that a calling is when you look at your unique experience. You look at where you struggled in your life. And then you take basically record of all of the skills, resources, interests, abilities that you have now to support the people who have gone through the struggle, who are still going through the struggle that you once experienced. Because then my story, I can walk into a room of people and talk about social anxiety purely from a place of knowing what that was like, being able to ask someone a question about it without coming from a place of superiority. When I'm talking about tribute to the New Yorker or Today Show, I get to go on and look that camera, look that reporter in the eye and say, this fundamentally transformed my sense of self-love, the ability to know that I belong in a community. And so a calling and challenging people to go a little bit deeper is understanding. It's like, you know, where did you struggle and how can you use what you now have to support those people? And when you do that, that's you know, Picasso said, your purpose on earth is to find your gifts. And then I think your purpose is to give them away. Your job on earth is to find your gifts. Your purpose is to give them away. I think that's a big idea of how I think about a calling.
Yeah, this whole concept of calling and purpose is sits very dear to me because it's something that I think it's like a slow burning fire and then the heat slowly gets turned up over time, and the fire is just blazing at some point, and then when it's at that point, you end up building, you know, social businesses or doing something that's completely out of your comfort zone, but that eventually impacts everyone along with yourself. And it's interesting because there's so many ways to look at it as well, because, you know, people talk about rites of passage, and other people, like in the book you said, Into the Wild, go on to hitchhikes, and I guess the material form that the calling takes is very different and unique for everyone. But it's about whether you actually have the courage to answer the call when it comes to you. Because I think everyone gets it at certain points in their life, like in the, you know, the hero's journey is talked about many times by Joseph Campbell and in so many other places. But I think fundamentally everyone has that at some point, and it's just about whether you answer it or you don't. And if you don't, it comes back 30, 40 years later. And this is what I understand to be a midlife crisis, which is you didn't answer it the first time, and now you regret the fact that you didn't answer it, and so everything's a mess, you know, and you wish it was better. So doing all of this work that we're talking about hopefully avoids that you being in that situation at any point in your life. So Yeah, I appreciate you actually, being a voice for that kind of work and being an advocate of it as well.
Yeah, man. Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. I oftentimes say to, especially when working with college kids, it's like doing the work is hard, but not as hard as living with not having done it.
Mm, yeah.
And it's like the idea that you didn't do the thing that you really wanted to, that is the weight that is a lot harder to live with than doing the work in the moment.
Yeah, I remember actually when I was reading Jeff Bezos' story. I can't remember the name of the book, but anyway, he was talking about when he should deciding on if he should execute on the idea for Amazon in the 90s, and he created this regret framework. And he said, "Okay, if I got to the end of my life, is this something I would regret not taking action on?" And he said, "Yes." And so he just did it. And now, obviously, I'm sure he doesn't regret it. I think when you look at your life from that point of view, which is, I guess, from a legacy standpoint, how is it you want your life to have looked if you're standing and looking back at all of the years? This is your last
Yeah.
day. You're looking back at all of the years. Would you be happy that you didn't take action on it, or would you be proud because you did? Which one do you want to kind of go with? Live with the regret or live with the pride and the sense of
Yeah.
fulfillment? And when you come from that place, it's a no-brainer, because everyone's going to get to that end destination. However it looks in the end is different for everyone, but we all end up there at some point. And it's just about what have you done up to that point to create a sense of fulfillment for you.
Yeah.
You have to live with those decisions and habits that you created along the way.
So what will be your legacy, V? What do you want to be remembered for?
That's a big question. I think about that a lot, actually. One of the things is spreading or raising the consciousness of the planet, and one of the ways that's the only thing I want to be remembered for: raising the consciousness of the planet. In which form it takes, one of them will be this very platform that we're speaking on, Know Your Legacy, helping people understand and see life from different perspectives, different backgrounds from around the world, different stories, different cultures, different traditions, different ideas. But outside of that, it's a period that I'm going through right now, which is what's next for me. Because I know I've got this platform's growing. It's going to always be with me. I love growing, connecting with people and sharing this information. But ultimately, I want to transform education in some shape or form. And that's what means a lot to me. That, and then also helping create space for men, just the way it was created for me a few months ago, as we were talking about, because that helped me transform. And I was one of only few men there, like everyone else were females. And I think we're still in a space of, especially people my age who are in their 20s, they don't have anyone to speak to about this kind of stuff, especially in London. It's all about, going to the pub, having beers and that kind of stuff. No one's allowing space to be created for silence, for emotion to come out, for short stories to be shared, for happiness to be shared, for darkness to be shared, to do yoga, to do ice baths, to do stuff that's out of your body, to get a full body immersion. Because it's one thing talking about it, but having your body fully immersed in the present through various ways isn't something that I've seen which people want as well. So I'm playing around with those two ideas, and I'm not putting pressure on myself as to how they're going to be formed, but I know that that's the direction I want to go in, because one of the things we spoke about earlier was, living, the laptop lifestyle, so to speak. That was essentially what I was doing earlier up until this point, actually.
Sure.
Was trying to chase that. And then I realized, actually, as much as people want to know how to network, how to build a platform, how to create a brand and an audience, I was like, that's all good. I know how to do that and I can share it, but do I care about it? Really? Not really. And I don't want that to be the long-term thing I'm known for. So I thought, okay, let me take a step back. It's not about taking action all the time. Let me rethink this, think about where do I want to place my heart. So yeah, it's a bit of a
Well,
transit.
it sounds like you've got some powerful anchors for whatever's next, brother. So I'm excited to see. I'm excited to see what comes of it.
Oh, definitely. There's a few ideas, and I'll be more than happy to share and speak to you about them, bounce some ideas off you, and see what happens. But I'm letting it, this whole idea of getting out of the way. That's what I'm really trying to do, because one thing I learned was when you want something really badly, you hold on to it tightly, you suffocate it. And it's this whole thing of what's my purpose? What's my purpose? What do I do? What do I want to do next? Well, if you keep asking that, the answer's not going to show up. Take a step back from it, and it might just show up when you least expect it. So it's hard to do, but yeah, I'm in that phase right now. So we'll see what happens.
Well, cheers to that, brother. Maybe we'll bring the Junto over to London. You'll get us up to like Kent or something like that.
Oh, most definitely, bro. I'll be more than happy to help you with that. But where can people find you on social or otherwise if they want to follow your stuff?
Beautiful. So you can check out me online. I'm at itsandrewhorn.com. It's Andrew Horn, ITS. My name, Andrew Horn, HORN, on Instagram and Twitter, where I'm pretty active. And then you can check out my podcast, What's the Big Idea? It's just itsandrewhorn.com/podcast. And right now my life is kind of split into thirds. So a third of my time is running this tech company that I started 5 years ago called Tribute, where imagine waking up on your birthday, every one of your friends and family members has submitted a 1-minute video telling you why they love you. Our software automatically collects these videos, compiles them into a montage, and delivers them as this really powerful gift. That my favorite stat about Tribute is that 80% of people who have received their Tribute, which is now well over 200,000 people, have cried tears of joy. So if you love somebody, it's a really powerful gift. The next third of my time is running the Junto, which is where we create these really powerful men's weekends to explore modern masculinity, personal transformation. So we do one of those pretty much every single month here in the States, and getting ready to branch out internationally next year. So that's wejunto.com. And then all of my speaking and writing, you can just find on my website, which we already talked about. But feel free to check in on any of that stuff. I can be helpful. Feel free to reach out.
Love that, bro. Well, definitely we need to do a part 2 on this, because I know there's so much more we can dive into. But yeah, we'll schedule that for some point in the future. But yeah, thanks again for taking the time, and I look forward to speaking again soon.
I loved it, man. And you are a great conversationalist, so I enjoyed the time.
Thanks, bro.